Okay, Chair, we're now live.
Right, thank you. Can I welcome you all to the November meeting of the Audit Committee? This will be live streamed. First of all, please note that this virtual meeting is being live streamed and recorded, and the recording will be made available on the Council's website following the meeting. Under the Office of Local Government Bodies regulation, this is outside the Council's control. However, people wishing to film or record the meeting should do so in a way that does not disturb. Could I ask everyone present to please turn off their mobile phones or switch them to silent and ensure that your environment is distraction-free. In addition, turn off or move smart speakers like Alexa, Cortana, etc., as these record conversations, and this could be a breach of the GDPR. As this is a virtual meeting, it will run slightly differently. Members will need to introduce themselves and state their name and confirm that they can hear and see the proceedings. This is important for the purposes of recording attendance and transparency of the meeting. I'll do this by undertaking an alphabetical roll call. Councillor Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Simon Bradshaw, I can both see and hear the proceedings.
Right. Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Charles, I can see and hear the proceedings, although you are a little bit breaking up. Thank you.
Councillor Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I can hear and see the meeting.
Bolton.
Oh, I thought it was Baldwin. I thought it was sorry.
Thank you, Chair. I confirm that I can see and hear the proceedings, but I can't hear you particularly well, and you're breaking up.
Oh, that's disappointing. Councillor Parson.
Yes, I can confirm that I can both see and hear.
Right. Councillor Taylor.
Good evening. I can see and hear proceedings.
I'll go to the officers present. Could you confirm that you're present?
Chair,
you proceedings?
Chair,
In Mazars.
Chair, you need to confirm that Councillor Baldwin can hear and see the proceedings.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Baldwin. Councillor Baldwin, can you see me and hear me?
I can hear and see you, and I can follow the meeting.
Thank you. Sorry, I missed you out. We'll move on to the officers. Victoria Gittins from Mazars.
Hello everyone, I'm Victoria Gittins.
Can you see and hear me?
Yes, I can see and well hear most of what you're saying. Yes.
No. Thank you. Mark Surridge from Mazars.
Yes, I can see and hear all the proceedings. Thank you.
Can you see and hear me, Mark?
Yes, I can.
Simon Jackson, can you hear me?
Thank you, Chair. I can see and hear proceedings.
Leslie Tinsley, she's not here, is she, Nikki?
Thank you. Leslie Tansey, Head of Financial Services. I can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Leslie Tansey, can you see me?
Yes, I can see and hear the proceedings. Thank you.
Adrian Ward, can you see and hear me?
Chair, I cannot see you.
Adrian, can you see and hear me?
Chair, I cannot see you and I'm getting very, very long delays when you speak. Is the chair still there?
Let's try again. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Chair, but I can't see you. And as I said, we are getting very long pauses when you're speaking, when I don't think anybody can hear you at times. I think, Chair, we may have to ask the Vice Chair to step in at this point.
Mr. Angel, because your connection isn't very good, I would suggest to the committee, if they wish to move it on to the Vice Chair for the moment while your connection is poor. Would you be agreeable to that?
Is the rest of the committee agreeable to the Vice Chair taking over in the circumstances?
Do you want me to dial in? I'll try that.
Yes.
Yes. Happy for the Vice to take over in the meantime.
Yes, I'm happy as well.
Shall I do that?
Yes, please, Vice Chair.
Right, this is Jill Bolton, Vice Chair of the Audit Committee. I'd just like to continue going through to confirm the officers who are here. So next on the list is Adrian Ward, Head of Strategic Support. Can you confirm, Adrian, please?
Thank you, Chair. I can now see and hear the proceedings better.
Thank you. And Matt Goodyear, Information Development Manager.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I can confirm, concede and hear proceedings.
Thank you. Lisa Maron, Audit Manager.
Thank you, Vice Chair. I can see and hear proceedings, and just to say, Kerry Beavis and Tracy Hayes won't be attending the meeting.
Thank you. Nikki Conway, Democratic Services Officer.
I can hear and see the proceedings.
Thank you, Nikki. And Tom Delaney, Democratic Services Officer, North West Leicestershire.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair. I can confirm I can see and hear the proceedings.
Yes.
Thank you. So shall we continue like this, or do you wish to...
I can't hear you properly.
What do you want to do?
I think in the circumstances, Mr. Angel, because we can't hear you properly, I think in the circumstances, the Vice Chair needs to run the meeting for the moment. If you want to try and come back in and via dialing in via telephone and see if that's a better connection. I'm terribly sorry, but we can't hear you properly.
Okay, shall I continue? Right, well, thank you for that. And we'll move on to item 1 on the agenda, which was apologies. And I have here that we received no apologies prior to the meeting, but we have received apologies from Tracy Hayes and Kerry Beavis at the start of the meeting. Item 2, minutes of the previous meeting, 22nd of September 2020. I'd like to ask each member of the committee in turn to confirm that you are content to receive and note the minutes. So could I start off, please, with Councillor Simon Bradshaw?
Thank you, Chair. I'm content to receive and note the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Charles?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm happy to receive the minutes. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin?
Yes, Chair, I'm happy to receive the minutes.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons?
Happy to receive and note the minutes.
Thank you. And Councillor Taylor?
Happy to receive and note the minutes, Chair.
And I'm also happy to receive and note the minutes. So, yes?
I don't know whether you want to see whether Mr. Angel has heard that and wishes to receive the minutes.
Well, he's not able to vote, is he, in that way, as the independent chair?
I would need some advice from the other officers to explain that. I thought he could vote.
No.
Vice Chair, the independent chair, you're correct, is not a voting member of the committee.
Okay. So I make that the 6 members have voted to receive and note the minutes. Is that correct, Nikki?
Yes, it is. I'm sorry about that. I didn't realise.
No, don't worry. Item 3, disclosures of pecuniary and personal interests. I don't think we've received anything in advance. Is there anything that any of the councillors wish to declare? No. No, I've had sort of shakes of the head from all of the councillors. Item 4, questions under other committee procedures 12.8. No questions were submitted. And now we move on to item 5, which is the External Audit 2019-2020 Annual Governance Report. And I think at this stage, I ask Victoria Gittings if you would please present that report to us.
The Vice Chair, it will be myself. It's going to lead on the report before we pass to Victoria.
Oh, okay. My schedule said Victoria, but sorry, is this Mark?
Yes, Mark, sorry, Chair, the engagement lead.
Right, well, if you'd like to start and then hand over as appropriate.
Thank you. So I think, first of all, the virtue of this meeting being as it is tantamount to explain the rather unusual circumstances we're in. And I think that the first thing that I really must say is that to get to this point, and when you see the overall proposal of our unqualified opinions, has taken in an inordinate amount of effort from your finance team. Your finance team has been under severe pressure since the outbreak of COVID. The volume of work they've had to get through, as well as produce this statutory report, has been, well, I can't commend it highly enough. It is a very challenging set of circumstances, and to get to a place where we're proposing unqualified conclusions in all aspects is something that really can't be underestimated. So on behalf of myself and the team, we do want to make sure our thanks are recorded, and that you as an audit committee are aware of that. In terms of the report itself, I appreciate timing on this and the complexity that sits in here might require a little bit more explanation. So there's a couple of things I really think is very important that you as an audit committee are aware of. So from starting from, I think it's page 6 of the pack, the executive summary. A couple of things that are really important here. So first of all, for clarification, our opinion covers 4 broad areas. 1, we issue an opinion on the financial statements. The value for money conclusion. We're also required to produce an assurance work over the whole of government accounts and potentially enact wider powers. Taking those in turn, and I will pick up some more detail in a moment. First and foremost, the most important thing is that we are proposing an unqualified opinion on the financial statements. That's a good, clean opinion. We do reference in there something called an emphasis of matters to reflect the effect of COVID-19. I'm going to come on to that in a moment. The big takeaway from that is that whilst that might seem unusual compared to last year, it is not unusual for this year. We are in very unusual, different circumstances, and an emphasis of matters is not a qualification. Secondly, we are proposing a clean value for money conclusion that the council has proper arrangements up to the 31st of March 2020. Again, the bit of context I think is really important here is that the value for money conclusion is a binary conclusion that runs through to the 31st of March. Activity that takes place after the 31st of March is not part of the conclusion for 1920. So we reflected on the impact of COVID as part of our risk assessment, but because really it was only 1 to 2 weeks within your financial year, it is not a 1920 issue. It becomes in 2020-21, which we'll very shortly be coming to. The remaining areas, there is nothing that I need to draw to your attention. There's nothing of note in those. So if I take you into the financial statements, within our executive summary, we've highlighted a few areas where progress are. The two pieces I think the most important, again, relate to the property, plant and equipment valuation. We're just closing out some residual queries in terms of getting the evidence that we need to support the financial statements. One of those has created an adjustment in the accounts as part of our testing. That has been adjusted for and will flow through the accounts. The one that I really think is important for you as an audit committee is the aspect on pensions. Now, the critical part is that we have not received the evidence that we need from the pension fund auditor to be able to issue our conclusion. That means we will not be meeting the reporting deadline of the 30th of November. We rely on the information that comes out of the pension fund to gain assurance that those numbers are true and fair. There's an underlying matter that we know will be affecting your accounts, and that is that the pension fund is expected to declare material valuation uncertainty on pension fund property assets. Now, what that means is the pension fund will hold property either directly owned by the pension fund or indirectly through pooled investment vehicles. At the outset of COVID-19, the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors issued a declaration that said, because of the valuation methodology, there was a lack of comparable information at the 31st of March to inform reliable valuations of property. The valuations are still the best estimate available. So the accounts are still true and fair. What material valuation uncertainty means is that it is just a disclosure to say, actually, there were a lot of things going on at that point in time. Now, if you think about property assets, the way that most of them are valued is based on actually the construction cost. And because construction stopped for such a long period, there wasn't as much data to hand in order to value those assets. And that is all that is happening here. It is just saying there isn't as much data as there normally would be. So what happens is the pension fund declares that there wasn't as much information. As a local authority, you have a share of those assets that you put on your balance sheet. And therefore, your share of those assets are subject to the same uncertainty and therefore should have a disclosure note that explains that. You cannot put that disclosure note in your accounts because the pension fund hasn't given you that information. We cannot conclude because we don't have the pension fund auditor's report that tells us exactly what that uncertainty paragraph will look like. It's a fairly convoluted process. I completely understand, and I'm sure there might be some questions on that, but I'll stop at that point and I'll come back to it if necessary. In terms of the remainder of the financial statements, I think the key thing for me to say to you is that obviously throughout the effect of COVID, we reflected on whether the financial statement risks were the same or whether they changed or not. Fundamentally, in our view, they remained unchanged. In terms of our particular findings, and I'm now moving over a little to section 3 of our report. Sorry, section 4 of our report, which is page 16 of the pack. This just sets out the adjustments that and unadjusted items in the financial statements. What's really important for me here is that there's actually there's not a large number of adjustments here. So contextually, again, something as an audit committee, it's important for you to contextually kind of the level of adjustments that we're seeing here are less than what we see elsewhere, which is a good result for you as an authority. The other is that there is no impact on the actual usable reserves for the authority. These are financial reporting changes that are going through. Section 5 of our report sets out the basis of the value for money conclusion. I don't intend to go through that in any detail other than to reiterate that we're proposing what's called an unmodified or unqualified value for money conclusion. That's a clean opinion and a positive one for the authority. Also included in the report at Appendix C is our confirmation and reconfirmation that we are and continue to be independent and therefore are in a place to be able to issue a safe and appropriate opinion subject to the receipt of that information from the pension fund auditor. So I will pause at that point, Chair, and open up to the committee for any clarification and questions that you may have.
I have a question from Councillor Taylor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark. Oh, obviously I'm fairly new to Audit Committee, so it's the first time I've met you this evening. It's really difficult because this report's only been sent to us today and I've had meetings back to back all day, so I've not even had a chance to look through this report. So I'm sure there's plenty of questions I have, but not being able to read it prior to the meeting is really difficult. So I just really question for me is why has it been sent to us so late without giving us an opportunity to read through, I think is my question, because I probably have got questions, but I don't know what they are.
Thank you, Kate. So I'm going to respond in two formats. One is I think appreciate that it's important that as a member of the audit committee that you understand the basis of the report. Because we're not in a position to be able to issue our conclusion, I'm more than happy if you take the time when you're ready, you can send those questions, probably safest through the council to us. And we're more than happy to respond in that way. And I will perhaps unfairly for the council suggest that if anybody else wants to do that, you might want to collate those before they come through. Secondly, in terms of timing, I completely understand, and like I said, it's a challenging report to get your head around, particularly if you're new to it. It's been particularly difficult because of COVID and the remote working, and some of the matters that we've picked up around the adjustments have been rather late in the process, and we wanted to give you a complete report rather than an incomplete report. And that was a balance of judgment that we had to make between giving you something that was complete, but that we could talk to you and physically talk to you about, rather than something that might have been out of date and therefore you'd have questions that we then potentially contradict, if that makes sense.
Thank you. I have Councillor Parsons.
Hello there. Thank you for that. Just a question around the pension fund. The actuarial report on the liabilities was a £13.7 million movement in the pension liability in our favour this year. How is our certainty of that figure put next to what you've just said with regard to the auditor of the Leicestershire Pension Fund and you not being able to give us certainty?
Okay, so this is going to be whilst might seem like a simple question, is not necessarily going to lead to a simple answer. So First of all, the pension fund figures as it stands, we believe are the best estimate of the figures. What we do not have is we do not have the outcome of the pension fund audit to determine whether the pension fund audit has changed. We don't know at this point in time if any of the numbers in the pension fund have changed, and therefore we have to go with the basis that the figures in the accounts are correct, subject to getting that assurance letter. What it means in terms of the carrying value is we've performed our own reasonableness tests, and we've also looked at the actuarial assumptions that sit underneath the both the calculation of the asset and the liability. Subject to getting the assurance that the underlying data at the pension fund is correct, because that obviously, you know, if the underlying data isn't right, then your output won't be right. That's the piece that we're missing. Our calculations show that it's unlikely to change, but we can't conclude until it comes through. What I talked about was the material valuation uncertainty. Now, this is the same as the assets that are in that disclosure is the same as the council's assets. So that would be things like the main council buildings. The really key bit is that those pension fund assets are still the best estimate, and the council's property assets are still carried at the best estimate in the financial statements. They are the right numbers, and our work shows the numbers in the accounts are true and fair. All that we are doing is ensuring that the reader of the accounts recognises that COVID-19 affects the reliability of an estimate, as any estimate would do. Once COVID washes out next year, well, we hope it will create greater certainty. But at any point in time, you have to prepare the accounts on the best available information that you have. Otherwise, you'd never produce a set of accounts. So we think the accounts are in the right place.
Something on that?
Of course.
With regard to the timing of those figures, then, when would we, in the process, so our year end would have been March 20. So when would we have received that actuarial figure of 13.7 million relative to when you would have sought certainty of the audit of the accounts that the data to deliver that figure was correct? Because would they have given us that figure on what they thought it was 31st of March, or given that they would have had hindsight if they gave us that figure in June and had seen 2 months of COVID?
Yep, you're right. Those figures would have been produced and developed through, I believe, the first cut estimate comes in March. The second cut comes in, I think, June or July, and therefore sufficiently through that process. I don't have the exact date that those numbers came through into the accounts, but I know it was after the balance sheet date.
I have no more hands up. Are there any further questions for Mark or Victoria? Please. No. Okay, then can I just ask, I'll go through one by one again, but I think what we have to do is just to note this report. Is that correct, Nikki?
That's my understanding, yes.
Okay, thank you. So just going through, Councillor Simon Bradshaw, are you happy to note the report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, happy to note.
Thank you. Councillor Charles?
Thank you, Chair. Happy to note the report.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin?
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to note the report.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons?
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Taylor?
Yes, happy to note, Chair.
Thank you. I'm also happy to note. So we've agreed on that. Now I see that the Chair, Mr. Angel, is back with us. Do you want to try a handover at this point, Nikki?
you want to check if Mr. Angel can speak and can hear and see the proceedings?
Mr.
Can you hear
Angel,
me? Because if you
Mr. Angel, can you
Can't hear
hear
it at
and
the moment.
can you hear and see the proceedings?
No.
Then I don't think we can.
Yes, I can hear and see you, yes.
I need
I'll carry on watching in that case. But at least I can see what's going on now.
So shall I continue? Thank you. We move on to item 6, which is the annual statement of accounts for 2019 to 2020. Simon Jackson or Leslie Tansey, I understand that one of you will be introducing this. So I don't mind who does it. Leslie?
I'm happy to do that, Vice Chair. I'd like to introduce item 6. It's a statement of accounts for 2019-20 for approval for the accounts to be published. It's an annual set of accounts that presented in Appendix A, which have been externally audited by our external auditors, Mazars, that have just gone through the audit report. The set of accounts comprise of a consolidated balance sheet, an income and expenditure account, a reserve statement, cash flow, a HRA set of accounts, and collection fund set of accounts. I'd just like to draw your attention to page 11. That is not part of the primary statement, but it does provide information on the revenue outturn position compared to the budget, but it's not part of the statutory accounts for 2019-20. I'd also like to mention and to note a minute, there is a typing correction on page 31, note 6, which Mazars have already been made aware of, but this will need correcting before the statement is published. If Simon's got anything more he wants to add to my introduction, or we're happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. I mean, I just will reiterate Mark's thanks to the finance team. It has been a tremendous effort. Just on this, I haven't particularly got anything to add. I will say that hopefully at the end of this item, we will be broadly in a position to approve these accounts. Clearly, it is subject to getting that final piece of information regarding the pension fund. So we're not totally in a position to finalise the accounts until we do have that information. So at the end of this, I will propose that the accounts are, there is a delegated authority given to a group of us, and I would suggest possibly myself and the chair and maybe the vice chair as well, to agree between us the final version of the accounts and any adjustments that are required. Obviously, we hope there will be, other than the typo that Leslie mentioned, we'll obviously be hoping that no adjustments are additionally required due to the pension fund issue. But I would like to propose that at the end as a delegated authority to absolutely finalise the accounts. Obviously, the committee has an opportunity to come up with some different method, if so appropriate, or if any other members are interested in seeing the final adjustment, then I'm sure that can be accommodated as well. But I think just for Leslie and myself now, it's any questions on the detail. It is astonishingly detailed, but if there are any, then I think between me and Leslie, we will do our best to try and answer them this evening.
Thank you, Leslie and Simon. I currently have no raised hands. Does that mean that, Councillor Parsons?
You couldn't have expected to get away that lightly, Jeff.
No, I didn't, Jeff. I didn't.
Blimey, I was just waiting to let other people have a turn. Yeah, can I just run through? I have a number of points, and I will try to go through them in an order which is logical. I just need a couple of points of clarification at the beginning to understand a couple of points before then going on to work through a few questions, if that's all right. So if Simon and Leslie are okay to give me some clarification on a couple of points. The first point of clarification is every year in the original budget and the outturn, I know that the revenue outturn summary is just a guide to us and not part of the statutory declaration. But in the precept requirements, in the NNDR, council tax, Loughborough special levy, collection fund, surplus, new homes bonus, each one of those is always perfect in the outturn and the original budget. Is that because we account for differences somewhere else? Because I can't believe at the beginning of the year, we know exactly what the precept's going to be, and then it delivers that in the outturn. So I presume we take that figure, put it in as the outturn, and put the variance somewhere else. Is that correct?
I can certainly answer that for you, Councillor Parsons. We obviously set the precept in the year, and any carry forward is obviously shown in the working balance, any differences. But in terms of how we put those sets of numbers together, we set the budget. The collection fund is actually shown, the surplus and deficit on the collection fund, which is the NDR and the council tax. That has like a rolling cycle. So any adjustments and the Loughborough special. So any adjustments from one year get adjusted in the government returns the following year. So hence that's why it does actually balance off. I think you'll see on page, I think it's 11 of the report, you'll see the, even though they've got the precept income at 16,937,000, there is an adjustment for the collection fund above of 173. So there's like it's a rolling cycle. So that's how that actually statement works.
So the correction is the collection fund line, which appears both above and below. So it appears above and then again it appears below. So that's the adjustment line for all of those. Because every year I've noted now, as I've tracked back through the last few years, those two columns in that space are always identical. I presumed that we were making an adjustment on the variance because the outturn is never the same as what we budget.
That's right. I mean, the actual outturn, if you can see, we've budgeted for 971, and that was the budget gap between obviously the expenditure cost and the precept amount, and that's the shortfall that we budgeted for. And you can see in the 2.3 million, that's obviously a combination of service costs that have overspent in the year, which I have got a list of those should you want those. Any difference, I mean, like the new homes bonus, we set that at the beginning of the year, and that is a grant that's given to us in the year. So we set the budget as for the grants that are coming in. So the announcement that's coming in a couple of weeks' time for next year's budget, we take those figures, and they don't necessarily move. The new homes bonus figure is a set figure, but certainly the NDR, the collection fund, there is a rolling 3-year cycle on that.
Okay. The second point is just on a policy issue again, just for clarification. When we're moving money year on year between some of the reserves, is that based on a circumstance by circumstance decision that Cabinet make during the year? Because I can't see any pattern or policy to how much we move each year. I can see, you know, something like the working balance. I recognise that's where we've had to do that because we spend too much, so in simple terms. But something like the other revenue reserve, do we make a specific project by project decision to move money, or do Cabinet make a policy decision when we're drawing up the accounts to say, as a balancing figure, that's what we're going to move from there to there?
If I can just answer that one again, Councillor Parsons, there's on the capital plan reserve, we've got 1.9 million. All the adjustments that go in and out of the capital plan reserve get presented to Cabinet in an update report. So there's an update report going to December's Cabinet. So we've got all the Cabinet the capital items rather, go to SLT, Senior Leadership Team, for a decision before they get presented to Cabinet on the capital plan reserve. On the other revenue reserves, they are specific, I call them, some are ring fenced for specific purpose, like we have some homelessness grants. So some of the heads of service know about those reserves coming in from, say, DWP, the DCLG, and they are ring fenced for a particular purpose. So we have separate accounts for those, and they're controlled by the grants, the grant policies within there. And that leaves us with a reinvestment reserve. We've got a policy, a council policy, that we maintain that at £500,000 to be used for a specific one-off purpose. So again, the reinvestment reserve, we have to have Cabinet approval to use that. So it's not just a balancing off item. So what we do is we keep those reserves to a minimum. The only reserves that we use is a balancing off, but the out-term report, we generally, you've got the working balance is our balancing off figure, and that's one, even when you see the draft report going on the 10th of December, again, that's been presented to SLT. We've got a minimum balance, a recommended minimum balance of 2 million that we maintain as a council. So we're very mindful of what balances we're holding within those reserve figures.
Okay. Thank you. I just need a bit of clarity on that, because it'll maybe highlight a couple of questions later on. Virtually everything I've got to ask tonight is on the general fund. I'm relatively comfortable with what's presented in the HRA. I think next year will be an interesting year for the HRA, depending on what happens with rents and how much money we bring in. But the HRA is generally sound and solid from what I can see, and everything I've got really is just around some bits and pieces within the general fund, if that's okay. And well done this year. I recognise this year's been a challenging year. I'm asking the questions in the light of the fact that last year was, to my eyes, effectively a non-COVID year, and we as councillors should bear that in mind. We understand all the difficulties, we understand financial problems, not problems, but the issues we face, the challenges. But last year was a non-COVID year, and so I treat last year as if it was perfectly normal bar the last 2 weeks. If I go back over the last couple of years, my general assessment is, we've lost a lot of money in grants that money we've received, and we've done pretty well. We've not done too badly in trying to save and work our budgets well and get to this position. The slight concern is that throughout, I remain concerned, and I recognise this is an audit meeting, and to pass these, to note these tonight, but the income is the big issue regularly throughout lots of the bits and pieces that I can see going through this. By way of some specific questions and references, which just will help clarify, this year, if I go by page number, and this is page numbers that you're using, Mrs. Tansey, because you've been using it. I know Simon sometimes uses the number of the report, and I'm on the page number. So I'm on page 12 of the report, which is page 5 of the other bits. I noted in the capital expenditure, this is just a detail point, you presented the paragraph differently this year than last year. So last year you presented the first sentence the same, and then the second sentence was a straight deduction of the two figures. So I was expecting to see the net underspend of 9,800,000 and ... And then we get a line that says the net underspend of 140k represented 0.7 of the programme. That's a different presentation to how that was presented last year. Last year, the two numbers were just deducted to give us a true value there. And I noted we presented that differently for some reason this year, which I'm not clear about why that's a presentational difference in that sentence, because it looked a lot more favourable when we say 140k and 0.7%, whereas last year we said it was 1.2 million because we just deducted the two figures. So I'm just intrigued as to why there was a presentational difference there.
And I think we have gone on to say that the budgets on committed schemes worth 9.2 million will be carried forward. I'd have to check with the capital accountant, but I think the information that's there, I think, I suppose in a way we've taken the committed, the carry forward schemes out to say what we thought the net position would be. But I think we've actually commented that obviously we are, it was agreed to carry the 9.2 million forward. And again, we'll look at that again for this financial year. And we'll perhaps do some, on the slippage. We're very mindful that we want to maintain and reserve our capital balances as much as possible. So our position for this year will get presented to SLT again to say how much do we want to move forward. So
I appreciate the answer. I realise it's quite difficult. Just from a councillor's perspective, I feel like we just didn't want to say we underspent by £9 million on that line. We've worded it but to make it not look the same.
In essence, that was the
kind of like simple language. I like simple, repeatable language and repeatable sentences, because then I can make easy comparisons. Just moving on, I noted on page 13 the bullet point that references the HRA account, and this is just about my only reference to the HRA account today. 1% of income reduction last year was £320,000, as memory serves me. And a 1% reduction this year is only 214k. And I'm wondering if that 1% is a year on year, does that mean in 2 years' time there's going to be zero there? Because that seems an awful lot of money. The 1% reduction of 312k on last year, that same reduction was only 214 this year. And I'm just a bit surprised at the scale of reduction in the amount on that figure. That would lead me, as a simple person drawing a straight line, to go 1% next year is going to mean the figure's 100k, 1% next year is going to mean it's zero. Well, that doesn't make sense to me. So that's my only question. I'm not quite understanding how we got there on those two figures on the HRA account. And that's just about my only HRA question today.
If I can just answer that, Councillor Parsons, I think in terms of the HRA, there was certainly a 1% freeze or reduction rather for a period of time. In terms of that was the 214 for last year based on the actual figures. Now the other number that you're referring to, is that based on a budget figure or
I think I'm looking at this report last year. So I'm looking at exactly the same bullet point last year, which references that the 1%, if I find the exact point, the 1% was 312,000 last year. So I'm just iterating in my mind that the 1% reduction this year is only 214, and last year it was 312. So if I draw a line for that, in 2 years' time, we're going to take off 1%, and the reduction is going to be zero. Which doesn't.
I mean, we're certainly not. We've certainly not got that freeze anymore going forward. In terms of the local government or the HRA guidelines from this year, 2020, we are back up to CPI inflation plus 1%. So we've actually going forward. We won't have that reduction. I can certainly check out those differences between last year and this year. We have sold sort of up to about 50 council houses last year, but I'll certainly have to check.
It seems a big difference, that's all. I'm just seeking clarification. I realise these are quite detailed questions, but I own there are things I don't understand.
Yeah.
I'm asked to vote on something and pass something and agree with something, and I need this clarity to understand these bits. So it just seemed out of proportion to me. So it's just some reassurance about the proportionality of
yes,
that.
I can certainly confirm that. And just another thing on the HRA, we are, even though it appears that our balances are good, we are very mindful that we're looking at a 30-year business plan for this new budget round, because obviously we are selling a number of council houses year on year. So we've got to be mindful that we have got the £79 million debt on those council houses. So a 30-year business plan is something that we're very mindful of, that we are looking at as a separate issue to the general fund.
Again, just a point which may require further explanation because I just don't understand it. And I've looked at the note and didn't understand. I'm just turning over to page 16, and it's just again a difference in figures. On page 16, on the comprehensive income and expenditure statement, the actuarial gain on the pension fund comes out at 17 million. When we talk about it earlier on in the income and expenditure, we come up with this figure of 13.7. I went to note 34, and I still don't really understand the difference between the two figures on note 34. So I just don't understand why in one place we account for the pension fund gain as 17 million, but in another place in the income and expenditure we account for it at 13 million. And I know the note's there, but I don't understand the note. So I don't understand the note of £4 million difference, and I think it should.
I think I'd have to go back to the pension valuation statement and just work that through, Councillor Parsons, and give you an answer on that one. But I mean,
Okay.
certainly.
Thank you for that. Again, I just don't understand it. So I don't need to know why the two figures are different. I recognise there's a note there telling me why they're different, but I don't understand the note.
Yeah, I'll certainly come back to
on this year and last year, we've run down the bank overdraft from 17-18. It was £1 million. Last year, 600 0. Is that a policy decision? Have we done that deliberately? Because we've run down the bank overdraft from £1 million to almost zero.
So certainly not a policy decision. In terms of the bank and where we are as at the 31st of March each year, we certainly on treasury management hold sort of 50 to 60 million pounds in treasury management cash. What we have to do.
I love that. I love it.
So what we have to do for reporting purposes is split out all the balance as at that 31st of March of what are the credit balances and what are the debit balances. I'm getting a bit technical now, but we've certainly not made a policy decision.
Okay, I just wondered because it seemed an awful lot. I just wondered if it was because, say bank charges. I mean, we're all saving money on bank charges like everybody else. I presume we pay bank charges, so it makes good sense. I just wonder why it seemed a very.
Just to answer your question, now every day we do treasury management, and every day we have got a sweep facility with our bank, which clears the balances to zero, so we don't incur bank overdraft charges at all. So we've got that in place with HSBC as part of the tender contract.
Okay. Thank you for that. On page 21, I couldn't understand what it was that had changed so significantly. The depreciation, impairment, amortization figure was so much higher this year, of 14.5 million. The last 2 years it's been running something at 7-8, but it was a significant increase. And I tried to work my way through the rest of the papers and couldn't, in my head, crystallise where the extra 6 million in depreciation or impairment had come from.
Again, that's possibly a very high-level summary figure from our obviously our valuations. We've had a 5-year valuation exercise done this year by Wilkes, Head and Eaves. So there is some detail on note 10 as to the breakdown of those figures. But again, in terms of specific increases from one year to the next, I'd just have to give you perhaps a small note on what the breakdown is on that.
It's just the scale of difference. It's £6 million.
Yeah.
You know, it's
Yeah.
in our favour, and it's a lot. And I just wondered what it was that we'd done.
Actually, there might be something at the very beginning of the report that talks about the increase in the valuation on council houses. I think if you go right the way back to the beginning of the report, there is something.
We increased value by about 20 million from 224 to 229 or 249 or something this year on the housing stock, on the capital valuation.
Chair, may I just offer you something on that?
Yes, certainly, Mark. Thank you.
One of the big drivers in valuations this year is that the previous years, your council dwellings had been subject to the rent cap and the rent reduction cap. So now that so over the past 4 years, because council houses, the basis of valuation is driven a lot by income. And because over the last previous 4 years, your income has been forced downwards, and now you move into that upwards to I think it's CPI plus 1%.
Yes.
You get that accumulated balance that comes through, because you know the secured income over the future, and that would have been the biggest driver of change through your council dwellings. And I can say obviously that we have audited those numbers, and we're satisfied that the movements are well explained and understood.
Okay, just a bit of clarification on the £6 million will be good, just to understand why it's £6 million more this year. On page 31, I know you said there was a misprint. I don't know whether I've circled the misprint, but I've just circled the point at the bottom of the first table that says gain on the disposal of assets, which is in as an expenditure. I don't know whether that's the problem, but that's what I've got penciled. I wanted clarification as to why gain on the disposal of assets was an expenditure. On page 31, bottom of the top half of the first table. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just whizzing through to page 31.
Sorry. You can see why I love paper. I hate to be, I'm bad for trees, but it's so much more efficient working.
Yeah.
Page 31 is, and the first table, the bottom half of the first table, the last item says gain on the disposal of assets, 254,000, but it's in the expenditure section. And I was trying to seek clarification as to why gain on the disposal of an asset would be an expenditure.
Yeah, I can see why you're querying that. I'd have to double check that one, Councillor Parsons. So I'll make a note of the things that you've actually asked me.
I appreciate it. I'm sorry to do it late.
No, that's absolutely fine.
Homework. So I didn't really understand why that was there, because it seems like it should be in the income column, but it's obviously me being stupid.
If anything, it should be a loss, but I'd need to check. I just need to check the numbers before I confirm.
Okay. Going back to on page 32, I'm cognizant of what you said to me earlier about the reinvestment reserve. I note that the members' grant scheme has been taken out of that. Presumably it was in there last year because it was a one-off last year, and we've moved it somewhere else into somewhere more specific in the general fund because we've zeroed it this year on the member grant scheme, or is it just because we didn't spend it?
Yeah, all of the reinvestment items are generally one-off. That's why there's sort of, you can see something in one year, and then basically it's a zero, or unless you've got a scheme that's perhaps running over a couple of years where you've got a lump block of money and we're drawing down on that. But generally the reinvestment reserve is only to, I think the narrative says at the top, to be used for one-off projects.
Other bits, yeah, no, that's fine. Okay, so that means it's moved somewhere else because we are still doing the member grant scheme. So that means it appears somewhere else.
Sorry,
Simon's
Chair.
got his hand up.
Sorry, just on that one, I think when the member grant scheme was introduced, it was essentially a mid-year introduction. So it was financed out of the reinvestment reserve as a one-off. In subsequent years, it got mainstreamed into the budget. So it was part of the sort of general budget figures rather than financed through the general precept rather than as a one-off reserve as it had been in the initial year. Okay,
thank you. I thought that, but I'm sure it goes somewhere else now into the general melee of the general fund. Page 48, got two questions on the top table, if I can. The first one is just to understand a bit more clearly what sundry and reserve creditors means, because it's up by sort of £2 million. And I don't really understand what the reserved creditors means particularly. Sundry creditors is a bit more of a familiar term to me, but I'm unclear what reserved creditors are.
Page 48. Did you say?
Page 48. Oh, sorry, did I not say the page number? Page 48, note 19.
So what happens at the year end? We have a cut-off of where we stop paying our suppliers, and in the accounts to make sure that the accounts are true and fair, and we've got all the expenditure included within the right period. We have to go through and identify payments. A lot of those, Councillor Parsons, are related to HRA. There was some sort of outstanding invoices that hadn't been paid. That's what they are. The work had been completed, but we were just waiting on invoices to come in to pay those items. So that's what that difference is.
Would there be any reason or any policy as to why it's continuously going up over the last 3 years? So March 18, it was 6.5 million. March 19, it was 7.7, 7.8. Now we're running at 10 million for those two. Is there a reason why we've got a trend that's very distinctly upwards?
The initial reason was because we needed more time at the beginning of the year-end process, so we sort of brought the payments closure down sort of a week forward. So that meant that the reserve, we had to put more reserve creditors through to get the true balance. But in terms of, I think this particular year, that all stems around the HRA on that particular line. Again, I'd have to sort of check with the HRA head of service to see.
This direction of travel seems very distinct and quite large, so it's really just about that trend over 3 years. Similarly, the same question really on the NNDR lines. The NNDRs in 2018 were circa 2.5 million. Last year running at 3.5 million. This year we're running at 8 to 9 million of creditor, short-term creditor over those lines. Is there a reason why we're doing that?
I mean, yes, there's
2.5 to 9 million.
Yeah, I mean, they're all the precept payments that we owe, obviously, that we owe the county, the fire and the police. So we basically do a year-end return to government based on the NDR figures that we've received in and what we are due to pay out. In terms of why they've increased over the year, have you got any comment on that, Simon, at all?
It just seems a lot from 2018. We were holding 2.5 million that in inverted commas we owed at that point in 2018. We're now holding 9 million. I mean, in layman business terms, sounds like we're paying late. That's what I'd be thinking in layman's business terms, looking at these. I'm sure that's not the case, but as a layman business person, I'd be looking at that going, oh yeah, we're holding money, we're paying late to store money. But that's not the way we operate. I understand that. So I just don't quite understand why we've gone from sort of 2.5 to 9 million over 2 years.
I think some of it's timing. So I don't think it's any policy. We do pay in line with the schedule, so there is timing. There's also some of the balances have been building up. So things like the enterprise zone, we've had the money in and not necessarily paid it out as things have been sorted out. So actually we've been going through a process of sorting the enterprise zone out. So some of those payments in there may dissipate. Similarly with the Leicestershire pool as well, they're monies that get settled up after the year end. So that's certainly one reason why that would be a delay. And generally, business rate collections do increase year on year with the inflation increase in business rates. So that's partly reflected in our settlement and how the whole complex business works. But just generally, the numbers are increasing. So on average, you would expect some increase year on year. I mean, I would say, I admit, the central government share from 4.6 to 2.5, that is particularly large, I guess, in the scheme of things. But it is really just a timing thing, and the fact we do pay in line with the there is a set schedule for that. I don't know whether that particular schedule changed this year to explain some of that.
Okay. And the last point from me, it's not very often that the end of year audit report makes me smile, but I enjoyed page 61 at the bottom on the mortality assumptions. As a future pensioner, I'm delighted that I'm likely to live 0.7 of a year longer. So that raised a smile when I got near the end of the report. So that's all my questions done. Thank you very much for that. So bar subject to just a couple of those points of clarification, if you can pop those through.
Yeah, certainly.
To help me understand a couple of those points, because there's a few things there that just need some crystallization. Other than that, I'm happy with that. And the HRA side, I'm relatively comfortable with at the moment. I think, as I say, next year is going to be the HRA is going to need some more serious looking at, but we'll see. Thank you, appreciate that, and thanks for all the hard work. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Parsons. I have no other hands up. Is there anything else that anybody wants to ask? Nope. Then,
Chair, Mr. Angel has his hand up.
Oh, okay. He didn't on my raised hands. Okay, Mr. Angel, you're muted. You're muted.
Apologies, can I be heard now? Just like to thank you for taking over the meeting in my absence. Could I add my thanks to the finance team for all the work they've done in the preparation of the accounts in what must have been extremely difficult circumstances. I'd like to thank them very much, and also thanks to Mazar as the auditors as well.
Thank you.
Okay.
There are two recommendations to this report, which I will just quickly read through. Recommendation 1, that the statement of accounts for the year ended 31st of March 2020 be approved, and that the chairman as presiding person be authorised to sign the accounts on behalf of the audit committee. And recommendation 2, that the letter of representation be approved for signature by the chief financial officer. And I know that Simon Jackson would also, perhaps we can come back to that one, Simon, about the delegation of authority for the pension reserve. But can I go through, I mean, I'm a little bit concerned, Councillor Parsons, that you've asked for clarification on a number of things. Do you feel that you could support the recommendations, or?
Sorry, Chair, I do feel I can support the recommendation. The points are all relatively, I don't want to say they're minor points. So things like, for example, whether that is a gain or a loss on that particular sale of a capital asset might be a misprint. It might just be a column move. And I don't feel anything is material to my confidence in the report. They're all items that require clarity, or things, for example, like the difference in the two pension valuations. I just physically don't understand, but I don't think it's material to me supporting the paper going through in the round.
Okay. So let me do a roll call then. And if you can state whether you are in support of the two recommendations I've just read out. So if we start off with Councillor Simon Bradshaw.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm in support. Thank you.
Councillor Charles.
Thank you, Chair. Happy to support both recommendations.
Thank you. Councillor Baldwin.
Yes, I'm happy to support both recommendations.
Councillor Parsons.
Yes, I'm happy to support.
Thank you. And Councillor Taylor.
Yes, Chair, happy to support.
And I also am happy to support. We did, I think, Simon Jackson, you were going to propose a delegation.
Yes. So
Adrian, did you want to say something?
I think, Chair, the problem is you've now approved the accounts as they are written, so they cannot now be changed, because Simon was going to propose a delegation of authority to make any amendments that were required in relation to the pension item. But I don't think you can now do that unless you rescind the resolution you've just made.
Well, I need some advice on that, because when I was introducing the recommendations, I said that we would take the delegation separately, and I wasn't contradicted.
So sorry. Can I try and maybe help us with this? So I think if we maybe just run through the vote again, but in terms of we would need, I think the delegation needs approval by committee as well. So maybe we can roll those two things together. Just in terms of process, what I will suggest is that Councillor Parsons has had some queries which hopefully we should be able to answer. I think one of the issues is there's a team of people puts the detail together. So Leslie and myself aren't necessarily au fait with the details, but I would suggest that we clarify those items, so we can bring a clarification of those items and possibly a correction of gain to loss, which I suspect is the case. And then we'll also have the final view on the pension scheme audit, which is obviously we're waiting for the auditors and then for Mazars to confirm that to us. So once we've got those bits of paper and those items in place, what I will propose is that a new resolution that the accounts are approved subject to Mazars being comfortable with the pension number as stated in the accounts, and subject to Councillor Parsons' queries being dealt with and acceptably and accepted, and then the approval can be delegated to myself as Section 151 officer, with maybe yourself and the chair to approve those, to approve any amendments that would be required. And I apologise to Nikki there, because that's a really ugly sentence I've put together there. I should have probably tried to write that down. But if we propose along those lines, and also to rescind the previous approval, then hopefully that will take us forward and get us to where we need to be.
Adrian, what do you think about that as the monitoring officer?
I think, Chair, I'd be looking for some clarification as to Councillor Parsons' queries. Is that they are resolved to the satisfaction of Councillor Parsons? So therefore somebody will have to get Councillor Parsons to confirm that he's happy with all of the responses he gets before the accounts can then be approved.
I think that would be reasonable, Adrian, yes.
Do you want to read out what you think the proposal is, Nikki, just for confirmation?
I'm going to delegate this to Tom Delaney, who's taking the minutes. I just wondered whether a councillor needs to make the proposal to amend the recommendation that you've agreed, because it's at the moment coming from an officer.
Yes, you're quite right, Nikki.
I think you're right. It will need to be proposed and seconded by voting members of the committee.
Would somebody like to propose this then?
I think there's confusion over what you're proposing. So if I understand it right, you've agreed that the statement of accounts can be approved, and somebody needs to propose an amendment to that recommendation that you want to delegate the authority to the S151 officer and the audit chair and vice chair, that once Councillor Parsons has received his clarification and is happy with them, and also that
subject to
the pension fund, and the pension fund information is clarified, that you will then be happy for the statement of accounts to be approved.
Would one of my fellow councillors like to propose that motion, please?
Madam Chair, I'm happy to propose it, but I can't remember all of what Nikki's just said. So I'm happy to propose it.
Did you write that down?
I will listen back to the recording to get the exact wording. I've been listening to everything that's been said so far. But my understanding is, as you said, Nikki, that the statement of account, that the recommendation one that's already there stands, but instead of reading that the statement be approved, just that final approval, the authorization to approve the statement be delegated to the Section 151 officer in consultation with the chair and vice chair of the committee, subject to, and then a sentence regarding the pension fund and another one regarding Councillor Parsons' comments that's already been said by colleagues.
So Simon, Councillor Bradshaw, that is what you're proposing. Yes. Are you happy to propose that?
Yes, I am, thank you.
Councillor Taylor and Mr Angel have both got their hands up.
Okay, Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. Obviously, as I've said previously, I'm very new to this and it is all very confusing, to be honest, what's going on. But I get the sense that Councillor Parsons' multitude of questions were quite technical, and it might be helpful moving forward that they're asked prior to the meeting so the answers can be provided for Councillor Parsons at the meeting. And then we won't have to go through this rigmarole of saying we'll wait till that Councillor Parsons happy with the answers he receives and we can actually approve it on the night. So it's just an observation, Chair, of as a lay person and a new person coming to this committee. Thank you. But I'm happy to propose a second Councillor Bradshaw's proposal, but I think it's just got very messy and very confusing, which isn't needed in my view.
Thank you. Mr Angel.
Yeah, through you, Vice Chair, could you ask Simon, I think we're running out of time on when we need to approve the accounts. What date are we actually looking for these issues to be resolved by?
Yeah, I think the deadline was the 30th of November, so it would be nice if we can make that deadline. I have to. Mark would probably have a different view, but a number of authorities are struggling to hit the deadline, so it's probably not super embarrassing if we fail to do that. But if we can do it by the end of November, that would be really, really good. But I think, to be honest, the pension fund resolution is probably on the critical path, and to be honest, I'm not completely clear where the pension fund auditors are along that route at the moment. So I think certainly from our point of view, going through Councillor Parsons' queries is something we can do in the next day or so. So I don't think that would be a significantly time consuming. And I think we are really in the hands of the pension fund auditors, and I think we're all in those hands, and that's not something that's in our gift. So it may be a question of as soon as practical after that information's been received.
Thank you.
Right, so can we move on to vote on the motion that has been proposed by Councillor Bradshaw and seconded by Councillor Taylor? Please. Councillor Charles, are you in favour?
Yeah, I'm happy to support the motion. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Baldwin?
Yes, I'm happy to support the motion, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons,
Yes, happy.
Councillor Taylor clearly, and Councillor Bradshaw, and I, Councillor Bolton, am also happy to support it. Thank you. I think at this stage, because we have Mr. Angel with us, and we can see and hear him properly now, that I'd like to hand over the chairmanship of the meeting to him. Mr. Angel. You're muted.
Stayed on mute. Sorry, I'll start again then. We move on to item 7, which is the annual governance statement for 2019-20 and the review of the Code of Corporate Governance. Adrian, would you like to introduce the report to us, please?
Thank you, Chair. I'll try to be brief. So this is the annual governance statement that sits alongside but is separate from the statement of accounts. It summarises our corporate governance and internal control arrangements at a high level and gives a summary of the annual review and any significant issues coming out of that annual review. Members of the committee who were here last year will remember the issue last year was the resilience and staffing within the internal audit team. The resolution to that issue was the establishment of the new shared service. And the only significant issue that we've included in this year's statement is to monitor the ongoing success or otherwise of that service, particularly given that it started after the pandemic had hit us. And the other issue is the annual review of the Code of Corporate Governance, which officers are reviewed and are not recommending that any changes are required this year. I'm happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Does anyone have any questions? Right, in that case, we'll move on to
Councillor Parsons, Mr. Chair, has got his hand.
Yes, Councillor Parsons.
On page 83, point 13, bullet point 6, I just don't agree with the inclusion of the coronavirus outbreak being included at the year end with regard to the internal audit programme in that statement. I don't think the outbreak had anything to do with us not completing the internal audit. I don't like that being in there.
Sorry, Councillor Parsons, which page is that on?
Page 83, point 13, bullet point 6. We have highlighted throughout the last year, 2 years, issues with the internal audit. And I don't personally like the reference to the coronavirus outbreak being associated with the fact that the internal audit wasn't completed last year. I don't think the two have any joined up link at all. I think that it was not a reason why the 1920 internal audit wasn't finished. I know there were issues, but we've been raising it for a number of years now, and I don't like the use of that in that sentence.
Right.
Either I'm looking at totally the wrong paper, but I don't have a page 83 within this
I
item.
found 83 now. It's in the first pack that came, the thicker bundle of papers.
I think it precedes the bit with the signatures for Councillor and Chief Exec and others to sign.
Yeah, it does.
I think the paper's headed up Annual Governance Statement 1920.
Sorry, Chair, my internet is playing up and I just cannot open the report at all at the moment.
See if I...
Well, Chair, it's open to the committee to propose amendments to the annual governance statement wording if members of the committee wish to do so.
Yeah, the bullet point said continues issues with staff turnover and recruitment delays persisted well into the 2019-20 financial year, and combined with the impact of the corona outbreak the year end resulted in the internal audit programme not being completed by the year end. I think the strength of the sentence is on staff recruitment and turnover rather than coronavirus, which it does say, in fairness, that came in at the year end. Could perhaps do with a little bit of punctuation somehow.
Could I speak, please? I've had my hand up.
Yes. Yes, sorry.
I would like to propose that we remove the coronavirus outbreak point from that paragraph.
Can I have a seconder for that?
Well, I'm obviously happy to second it, Chair, because I don't like it being there either, Chair.
Can I just ask the officers if it has impacted the coronavirus on the internal audits?
Through you, Chair, I think there were 2 or 3 weeks at the very end of the financial year, obviously, where the pandemic really started to hit and we went into first national lockdown. I think Councillor Parsons is probably right.
Okay,
that didn't have any major impact on the delivery of the audit plan in last financial year.
Thank you.
Do we need to take a vote on it, or do we?
I think, Chair, we'd have to include within the proposal, subject to the removal of the words that were referred to.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Well, at the moment, the 2 recommendations are to approve the annual governance statement as included in the statement of accounts. And I think that's where we would take that sentence out.
So subject to the removal of the reference to the pandemic in the relevant section.
Yeah. Then the second recommendation is to approve the Code of Corporate Governance attached as the appendix to this report. So can I have a proposer? Yeah, we've got a seconder and proposer. So can I take a vote on it then?
Sorry, Chair.
Yeah.
Just, this might not be a point that's relevant, but I just wanted to raise it before. It would also just require adding the word which into the paragraph, just so that the sentence still makes grammatical sense after the removal of the words outlined by Councillor Parsons. Just in case, if you needed to be aware of that, I wanted to know before the vote, before it had to be repeated.
Yeah, it's well spotted. Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah.
Right, then I'll go through the list. Right, Councillor Bolton.
I support the.
Councillor Bradshaw, do you support the recommendations as amended?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do. Thank you.
Councillor Charles, do you support the recommendations as amended?
Yes, Chair, happy to support the amended recommendations. Thank you.
Councillor Baldwin, are you content to support the recommendations as amended?
I'm happy to support the recommendations as amended.
Councillor Parsons, are you content to support the recommendations?
Yes, happy to support as amended, Chair.
And finally, Councillor Taylor, are you content to support the recommendations as amended?
Happy to support with the amendment.
Right. Thank you very much for that. I'll move on to the final item on the agenda, which is the work programme. Nikki, would you like to say a few words on this?
So this is the item 8, the work programme. It's just really to highlight to the committee future items of business and to enable them to plan anything that they wish to add to any of their business. So it has been modified in terms of the order of the appendix. For clarity, it's been organised in date order, so you can now see what exactly you will be having on the 22nd of December, which is your next meeting.
Does anyone have any questions on this? I don't see any hands raised at the moment. No? Right, the recommendation of the report is that the committee consider the items and whether it wishes to add or amend to the work programme. So we're content to approve the report as it is. First of all, Councillor Bolton, are you content?
I'm content.
Councillor Bradshaw, are you content to approve the report?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I am. Thank you.
Councillor Charles, are you content to approve the report?
Yeah, happy to approve, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Baldwin, are you content to approve the report?
I am content, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Parsons, are you content to approve the report?
Yes, I am, Chair. Thank you.
And finally, Councillor Taylor, are you content to approve the report?
Yes, Chair.
Right, I think that concludes the business on the agenda. So just checking that I've not missed anything out. There's no item 9, is there? In that case, I'll close the meeting and thank everyone for their attendance and wish